All right. It's almost that time, about that time. Where's my lovely co-host? I was talking about Matt Weinglass, but it's obviously Fiorella today. How y'all doing out there, guys? Welcome back to the TruthWire. I didn't even get a chance to share the show, fam. I got to share it on out, but we should get all there, guys. All the links down below to help out independent media are here, of course. I am your host, Craig Pasta Jardula, here along with...
Me, Fiorella Isabel. Sorry, I didn't know you were actually introducing me for once.
Well, I can introduce you every time if you like. I don't believe in speaking for, a woman of color. I let them speak for themselves. Are you already getting annoyed by my pain in the ass sniffs?
Your attempts to mock liberals? Yes.
Okay, so listen, we're going to have a guest here, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to have Stephen Sefton on from Nicaragua. He's our good friend. He works closely with the government over there. He's actually one of our attachés every single time we go to Nicaragua. He's also a radio journalist, media personality on the radio, and he's written a lot of great articles. He's just an amazing person, and I think he's going to give some great perspective, fam. Maybe you can put a cherry on top really quickly of the statement of okay, this happened in Venezuela, which there's a lot to unpack right now. I mean, everything that's out there on the mainstream media, obviously, is going to be fugazi, but the way the online crowd is acting, fam, is a little bit bonkers out there. So I think we have to set the record straight. But what does this mean initially in your thoughts for the rest of Latin America? And I want to point out again real quickly that it was us here on this show that pointed out that there would be a pivot and an intensified actions with Latin America once Donald Trump came in. In fact, that's what his whole purpose was. But what does this mean off the top of your head, fam, when it comes to the whole region now that Maduro has been kidnapped?
Well, I think this is a war on Latin America, as I've been saying, and I think we've talked about it, right? If Venezuela falls, pretty much everywhere else in Latin America is going to fall or is going to be affected, because it's one of the last bastions that remains that is actually an anti-imperialist, very, very sovereign type of country. And you have, of course, Colombia, and you have Petro saying that they're going to defend their sovereignty. But as we've stated, Colombia has always been much closer to the United States, being a NATO partner in the region. And you have Brazil, which has Lula, who has always been very much in favor of working with the United States in a way that could potentially put them in a way of complacency. And, I think Venezuela spiritually also represents a resistance access point in Latin America. And apart from all of that, you have the resource issues beyond the oil, with a lot of these minerals and all of this. And when we talked to our friend Terry, she talked about a block being built by the United States across the Americas. And that is what we're seeing, right? The Monroe Doctrine, the new Monroe Doctrine, so to speak, that never really left. And apart from that, the other element that we're not touching on is the Pax Judaica, or the Zionism takeover in every single one of these countries. Trump just appointed Stephen Miller to deal with Venezuela. Stephen Miller is an ultra-Zionist, and you're having him head over the supposed takeover of a Catholic country, a Christian country. So for a lot of those, Christian MAGA people, how do you justify that? How is that okay? What about the Christianity that is in peril? Because you know very well, after Malay, what the deal is. They're trying to turn much of South America into a Zionist continent, essentially, a continent that works for the behest of Israel. Now, this isn't conspiracy. This is just fact based on who is leading the charges, who are the ones that are being propped up. In Chile, you have a Zionist president now. You're getting all of this in Bolivia. You're getting all of this in the countries that previously didn't have that. So, guys, we're going to have our guests on soon, but I do want to, fam, I have to start by really honing in on what this means. And one of the things that the United States has said is that they are going to go after Cuba, that they are going to go after Colombia, that they are going to go after Mexico, and Nicaragua has also been mentioned. And our guest, as Pasta mentioned, is from Nicaragua. So, Jayme, I want to play that video that I posted in the beginning because there's a lot happening today in terms as to the Russia-U.S. situation. I think, as many of you probably heard, there was a U.S. seizure of a Russian oil tanker, the Marinera, and Russia has said that they demand that the U.S. ensures the life and the safety of all the Russians that are on board the ship. A lot of people are saying that, everything's done because of this, that this is now going to be a new war. I don't necessarily think that. Again, Russia always goes and says these things, but again, behind the scenes, what we're seeing is a continuation of a deal. We're seeing the possible reopening of certain business sectors in America and Russia that are American and Russian. So for me, that's much more indicative of where we're going with this deal than anything that we're seeing. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that. I think that's something that's developed as of this morning. So we're going to deal with it more. I want to play that video. Go ahead, Pam.
Well, my initial question to you is, Pam, is that hearing these, just seeing Rick Scott's face, man, god damn, doesn't he look like one of those like things you get for Halloween when you get the skeleton you're hanging on the wall? Like that's his face over there. It's really bad. It looks like a combination of that and that painting with the alien face that's going. You know what I'm talking about. That's what Rick Scott looks like. When we talk about Venezuela, we talk about the crude oil, we talk about the resources, we talk about the gold, we talk about the minerals and stuff. I think there's iron or something there. There might be a lot of lithium. We understand that. The secondary part to that, I think, is also punishing anybody who was part of the Bolivarian Revolution, right? The West wants to show, the oligarchs show that they don't want any uprising whatsoever. I think that's why we see extra punishment doled out to countries like Haiti. When it comes to Cuba and Nicaragua, they don't necessarily have the resources that Venezuela has. So when people say, well, there's no resource extraction there, what's the reason for us being there? What would your initial reasons be when you tell people, okay, this is why we're still kind of saber rattling with Cuba. This is why we're still saber rattling with Nicaragua. Your thoughts when you hear that right off the fact that they don't necessarily have the resources that Venezuela has?
Yeah, I think every country has a resource that the United States can exploit, especially when you have this island that's resisted U.S. hegemony for decades and that the U.S. hasn't been able to subdue despite literally starving people to death and completely isolating them from the entire world. And I think that is a huge significant threat to a potential uprising. And I think that's what I honestly do think like that is an element that they are trying to prevent, any sort of threats that will get in the way of their objectives. Because it's again, when you look at how Israel acts towards Palestinians, right? They're talking about eliminating Palestinian babies because they will one day grow up to be Hamas. Well, the same way you can say that the United States is trying to eliminate this idea of resistance to their plans, to their Donroe Doctrine, to their hegemony. And if you can eliminate that, then you're just going to have a population that lives dependent on what the state says and dependent on fear. And that's essentially what they've done to the rest of the world, and what they're doing to us in the United States is they're trying to force us to say, well, we're going to be okay as long as we comply. And then it becomes about compliance, which is everything. It goes along with everything we did for COVID and everything else. So, that's my take on that, Sam.
It's going to be interesting moving forward with this whole situation. I mean, a lot of people are saying that, this has nothing to do necessarily as much as the resources as it does making sure that Russia and China don't tap into the resources in Latin America. And I think there's a lot of, I mean, obviously we see Stephen Miller, your favorite advisor to the president, making these comments. I mean, he had this one-on-one with Jake Tapper the other day, and it was just, and this is a part that's also scary to me when it comes back at home. We're going to see a lot of people swinging back towards the Democrats. He's making the Democrats look sane again. This is reminding me a lot of what we saw in the George Bush era, the Juniors era, and I'm fearful of that. So, we'll see what happens.
Okay, well, let's start off by playing, I think, this from Rick Scott, who looks like the Grim Reaper. Yeah. Let's see what he says.
And Marco Rubio and Pete Hegseth and everybody, our military, Maria Corina Machado, and what they did in Venezuela is going to change Latin America. This is the start of changing Venezuela. Then we're going to fix Cuba. Nicaragua will get fixed. Next year, we'll get a new president in Colombia. We're going to start. The democracy is coming back to this hemisphere.
So the president.
So proud of what the president did.
Okay. Just right off the bat, fam, I mean, the United States, a United States representative saying that they're going to fix Cuba, that they're going to fix Nicaragua, that they're going to fix all of Latin America is not a normal thing for us to hear. Like, it shouldn't be. But the United States has made it normal to where people hear this, they're like, oh, okay, that's good. We're fixing these countries. I think it's more so towards the older generations, but even to the younger generations, like, this is all they've known, so they don't really see. It's kind of like stepping into, you have to step out of the world where this is normal. It's not normal for one country to oversee or involve themselves in the internal affairs of a sovereign country. Because, I mean, if we try to flip it, there's no way that would happen. But we've lived for so long like this that I think it's just, even somebody saying that, it's like, wow, like, okay, whatever, move on. Like, no, this is ridiculous. I mean, that they're telling you what they're going to do. They're not being covert anymore because they don't have to be. They don't have to be covert, because after Gaza and after Syria and after Russia, Ukraine, after pretty much everything that the world has seen, they have zero reason to hide it anymore. They're just flat out saying, we're going to do this, we're going to take their oil. And that's also reminiscent of the Republican Party and how their strategy is. They're a lot more open about what they're going to do versus the Democrats who try to, say it's about saving women and helping change. Like, so it's, but this is, to me, this is just so, it's kind of like, wow, like, we're just saying what we're going to do. So there you go. Those are all the countries that they're going to go after.
Well, I would ask you, I mean, you haven't been in the States for a while, right? You've been in and out, stopping in, stopping out. You probably don't peek at mainstream media the way I do, or talk to a lot of the people in the community the way I do. And it is a little disappointing. The things that were really disappointing, obviously him mentioning Nicaragua, which is on the list. And I think we'll get closer into that as we, figure out what's going on, why, and we'll kind of get a little reasons on why. But this anti-communist mentality seems to be a manufacturing of consent with the permission of the followers of the right, even though, Donald Trump was, I want to end wars, I don't want to go nation building, I don't want to do all the bullshit what turned out to be lies. It seems like he's found a way, and the Republicans have found a way to use the communist reasons again to manufacture consent to allow them to get involved with regime change, and it's really, really scary that they've been able to do that. It is mind-boggling because it's exactly what he campaigned against. He's doing, but he's doing it at the behest of the fact that he's beating back anti-Christian communist, fam. And it's very, very scary that they're getting away with that.
Yeah. No, I mean, everything that's happening now, I think, has been in formation for a while. Everything that's happening now is connected. Like we talked about Iran, right, being involved last time. This is also going to involve Iran, and people bring up the multipolarity issue. Well, the thing about is Russia and China aren't going to get involved unless their interests are there, and though their interests are actually in Latin America. And I think very much this is a huge part of why the United States is building this bloc, is because they are trying to ultimately compete with China more than anything, not with Russia. I think they think that Russia could be somebody that they can work with. But ultimately they all work together. I mean, if we think about the economy between the economic relationship between China and the United States, China exports so much to the United States. So I mean, this is this is a reality of the economy versus the geopolitical aspects of things going on. Do these people really want to disrupt an economic win for a nuclear war? I think that there are elements that would go that way, but I think overall the trend is towards a capturing of resources by powers like, China, the United States, and competing countries as well, like Russia, who are trying to maintain their resources, their nation's interests, and are trying to basically be the stronger players in the world. And when you look at things that way, then a lot of everything that's going on starts to make sense, because then you realize, okay, well, eventually this is going to become less about nation states and more about a powerful global class, no matter how you look at it. It's not just the World Economic Forum we're talking about. We're talking about, in general, the way the economy is going. You can't say that, China's role in Africa is all rainbows and butterflies. I mean, there's a lot of criticism. There's a lot of things that have happened in terms of what China has done that are not necessarily as good as people think they are. But they don't go about it by bombing. They go about it by creating jobs and creating alternative ways to do things. But that doesn't mean that there aren't any repercussions or negative effects. So there's a lot to be discussed as to what's going on and what's on the table. And I want to get started on that as we wait.
I think that there's a lot of people, Stephen should be in any second right now. He said he's putting on his internet. They had a little issues there, but he's going to get it propped up. Should be on any second. But there are a lot of talks that China now is, China's going to now start pulling the plug on the United States, right? Like the supposedly Trump going to Xi Jinping and negotiating an end to the ban that China had placed upon us for rare earth minerals. That ended, that we might see that come back. We might see the amount of treasury bonds that China holds being sold off. With them pulling the plug and saying now that we're going to take the oil, I mean, they've been helping Venezuela for quite some time. And the only way that Venezuela has been able to pay them back or eventually pay them back was through that oil supply. So, I mean, I don't think you're going to see, the China's laid down lightly on this one when it comes to the United States. However, I do think the underlying picture is what you've been talking about, is that, these are superpowers still trying to jockey and trying to do business with each other. Why get rid of the United States as a business partner where they pay the most for your products and you can profit off them immensely, and they need you, and they need you.
Yeah, and again, I'm sorry to say to all the people that consider China communist solely. That's not, that's a capitalist perspective. You're going to do business. I mean, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, because at the end of the day, I understand that they have to survive. But I am saying, like, you're doing business, right? You're engaging in capital. It's not an ideological or an ideologically driven thing. Even if China was giving assistance to, say, Venezuela, or if Russia was giving it, as far as Venezuela goes, they would have to pay for that assistance, and they would also have to know how to use it. Same with China and Iran. Even all of these things would have had to happen long ago. And so again, there's always capital in the way of these transactions. It's becoming a very transactional world, and I think we've long been there. But there is very little ideology left in terms of, an anti-imperialist ideology, which is why for us it's so important to talk about the reasons behind the attacks on Venezuela, the reasons behind the attacks on Cuba, the reasons behind the attacks on Nicaragua that are coming. And that's why we're going to talk about this with our guests, because this is not just an isolated event. That the elections that have been happening, the elections that are to come, the movements in all of Latin America, and the attack on Venezuela has been for a long time coming. Marco Rubio has been salivating to go after Venezuela, and he's even more hungry to go after Cuba, because that's his island. In his eyes.
Yeah, even though his parents left during Batista's reign, you know what I'm saying? It's
yeah.
And he don't get that twisted. Well, listen, I think a lot of people are they're a little confused about what socialism is, right? You talk about a country like Nicaragua, and we'll bring in our guest now. I'll introduce him. But as they've been going along with their infrastructure projects and opening up roads and highways and whatnot, and now you can move around the country a lot more. I mean, we went to Billy our first year there, and they were completing that road there. Ahmed Cabello did a whole story on it about how now you can just jump on the road and get yourself to Billy in a decent amount of time, where it used to take several days to travel there. That opens up markets. As goods and services can be moved around, markets open up. So whatever you want to call that, you could call that. Let's get a little perspective on that. What's going on in Nicaragua? What's the climate looking like in Latin America? What's actually going on in Latin America? Fam, there's not much talk about fentanyl now in New York when it comes to Nicolas Maduro. Now they're going with the cocaine thing. All of a sudden, fentanyl is out the window. But ladies and gentlemen, he is an activist. He's a journalist. I don't know what you call a radio personality who does media. I don't want to call him radio jockey because I don't think that's right. Either way, Stephen Sefton is here with us today, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome, Stephen.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, Craig. And it's wonderful to see you looking so well. And it's also great to see our beloved friend Fiorella.
It is great to see our beloved friend Fiorella and yourself too as well. Fam, why don't you get started and ask the first question to Mr. Sefton so we can get the ball rolling.
Stephen, before you came on, we played a clip of Rick Scott saying that, we're going to fix Cuba, we're going to fix Colombia, we're going to get a new president in Colombia, and we're going to fix Nicaragua. What is the feeling right now in Nicaragua, an ally, of course, of Venezuela, an ally both ideologically, but also on the basis of supporting and respecting national sovereignty, a country that has been sanctioned, that has been vilified in the same way that Venezuela has, and has defied the United States across decades now, and enacted a very well-educated population that believes in the Daniel Ortega and the people of Nicaragua and their right to sovereignty, and that also understands history, which is extremely important, and is the reason why Bolivarianism has survived for so long. Why? What is your take on what's the sentiment is in Nicaragua right now?
Well, there are various ways of looking at that. I mean, the government's perspective is that they obviously condemn the heinous crime that was committed against Venezuela and against President Nicolas Maduro and the First Lady, or the Primera Combatiente, as they refer to Celia Flores. So, there's outrage at the crime, condemnation of it, and also a reaffirmation of both Nicaragua and the region's vocation for peace. And that's something that they stress all the time, that they insist on respect between nations. They insist on respect for international law, insofar as that's worth anything at the moment. They insist on respect for people's self-determination. And that, of course, is what you'd expect from a government that derives its thinking, its vision from Augusto C. Sandino, who defeated the Marines, the Yankee Marines in 1934. People might argue about that, but the fact is that the Marines left with their tails between their legs, and they had to resort to a foul murder of Sandino in order to be able to impose the last Marine, which is the way Nicaraguans and Sandinistas in particular referred to the dictator Anastasio Somoza. So
I think we lost him for a second.
You lost him. He's been having issues with his internet over there too. It's,
everybody's got to get on with their lives. So that's what we're doing. And the government's put forward a very ambitious thing last year.
Stephen, come in and come back out. Stephen, come in and come out, because you're getting frozen. And
most people here in Nicaragua strongly support the government. So, the general feeling is that, and something very bad in Venezuela, but we intend to get on with our lives and implement. The government's going to implement its political, social, and economic program, and the population are going to get on developing their lives, their society, their communities, as they've been doing ever since 2007, when Daniel.
Oh, we got him out. He dropped.
Let me text him.
Yeah, tell him to get out and come back in. So as Stephen was saying, I just want to piggyback on what he was saying. The Sandinistas movement, and we've been to Nicaragua now many times, and we plan on going to Nicaragua this year, next year. And I want to ask Stephen about the elections ban, because that's very important, because I think the United States is obviously in 2026, you have Colombia's election as well. So that's going to be an important thing to deal with. And upon these new elections is an opportunity for the United States to seize and have their own proxy installed, their own puppet. And they have never missed an opportunity. We've seen this with Bolivia. We've seen that be exploited, the division within parties be exploited. Stephen, I was just saying, like, how I want to ask you about the election in Nicaragua, because it was supposed to be this year, but it was moved to next year. That's going to be used as a reason for the United States to say that Nicaragua doesn't have sovereign or real elections or fraudulent. They've been saying this no matter what, so it doesn't even matter. But that's a huge part of it. That it's a huge opportunity where they are going to go after Nicaragua in these terms and try to say that they don't have sovereignty. And again, like I think it was wise of Nicaragua to do this, but at the same time, I know it's going to be used against them. Fam, do you have anything to say to that before?
No, I mean, yeah, I just want to know more. Here he is back again, Steve too as well. Let's bring him in. Steve, Fiorella just started asking a question about the elections, pretty much about, your thoughts on what's coming up on them too as well. I also want to piggyback, and fam, if you want to put a cherry on top so Steve gets the full question, why was the Constitution changed to change the election date? Is there any particular reason the government gave to the people or whatnot? Because Fiorella did point out that they're going to use this and saying, well, Daniel Ortega is trying to give himself more power, consolidate power. Therefore, he extended his term. He rewrote the Constitution unjustly. And they're going to use that as a reason to go on in and say, we got to get rid of you, Daniel Ortega. But fam, any other question, any part of the question that you want to re-ask to Steve so he gets the whole question? He's out again. Damn.
Yeah, his internet isn't.
His internet's
really
bad. I don't think he's hardlined in either. So.
No, I mean, I just wanted to get his take on why. And I don't know if you know why, but I'm not entirely sure as to why. But again, like, they have to do whatever they need to do to protect themselves and protect, their sovereignty. And I mean, at the end of the day, they know they're on the chopping block, guys. Like, whether it's Cuba, Cuba. Trump said Cuba, they don't even have to go after Cuba because they're going to fall off themselves. That's that.
Well, a lot of the oil that supposedly, Cuba got a lot of oil from Venezuela. And now if that's pulled, we've been in Cuba when we've seen long lines for oil.
Yeah.
So it's what's going to happen next? Are the Chinese going to really butt in now? Are the Russians really going to butt in? My guess is no, because I think what you reiterated before is that China and Russia, at the end of the day, despite America's behavior, they want to do business with America, and they do. And at the very least, they're not going to mess with their hemisphere. You know what I'm saying? I don't think they'll mess with them at all. But that's my personal opinion. But this is something where, I think we can see that, okay, we just took a Russian vessel. It's Venezuelan oil. Okay, that's your hemisphere. Get out of our hemisphere. Pull the plug over here. So I think you're going to see that kind of behavior happen coming up next. So.
Yeah. Maybe we can get some thoughts from Stephen because his internet's not there.
There he is. Can you hear us, Stephen?
Hi, Craig. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you went with your phone instead, huh? And he's frozen again.
Yeah, is he in the basement? It looks like he's in.
I don't know where he's at. I know he's kind of works at him and his wife work at a school and stuff. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, because it looks like the internet is not so good there. Fam, we have to get better
there
internet
he
in
is.
Nicaragua.
Yeah. Stephen.
I can't hear you.
Okay.
It's all broken up.
Well, why don't we just get him out and then see if we can get him to come back in after he fixes or go somewhere else?
All right, let's do that.
Because it's gonna be in and out. I think,
Well, let's go to the doc then. How about that?
Yeah.
Put Fee up and let's get to the doc. So what do you got first?
Okay,
Fee?
so on the document, and if you just want to let him know if he can get better internet, he can come back
I will.
in.
Is this separating fact from fiction right now? Is that what we're going to get into first?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we can get into that first. Okay, so there's been a lot online, and I've seen some of the comments, right? Some of you saying, oh, Delcy Rodriguez is a traitor, that a lot of this stuff is being put out. But the problem is that a lot of this stuff is being put out by Western media, Western commentators, people with no ties to Venezuela or the Venezuelan government. And I have to, in fact, I'm going to add a couple things because as of this morning, the Syrian ambassador to Venezuela posted something against a lot of what we're seeing, a lot of this speculation, because I've never seen these people in my life. I've never even heard of them. And suddenly people are sending me it's not even analysis, it's like conjecture. But it's not based on anything but their own conjecture, which is why I thought this segment was necessary. And I want to start off by offering the various differences in response from Russia, because we have one response from Russia that differs from another. So we have Kirill Dmitriev. Kirill Dmitriev is, of course, in charge of pretty much securing some sort of ceasefire, more than ceasefire, some sort of peace negotiation with the Trump administration between Russia and Ukraine. And he has been going to Miami, Florida. He has been in these conversations along with Stephen Witkoff. They've had these conversations. So they're very interested from that side of the Kremlin to secure a deal, right? And he has made some statements regarding Venezuela on not really regarding Venezuela, but regarding what Trump's doing. He has actually stayed mum about Venezuela, offered no condemnation whatsoever, and seems to be propping up the idea that a relationship with the United States will help Venezuela. So I want to go ahead and mention that right now. If you can pull up the tweet, Jayme, really quickly. He quoted President Trump, "The U.S. will simply run Venezuela for the time being." Okay.
Why does he leave a tweet like that? It's like, it seems like it's such a fence-sitting thing.
Yeah, that's kind of how I've been seeing it. But I don't think it's actually fence-sitting. I think his stance is, supportive of Trump. And then he posted this, oil. But it is very cryptic, I would say, right? Because he said Venezuela holds the largest proven oil reserves, about 7 times the U.S. U.S. sanctions have helped keep output around 700K versus 3 million capacity. So he acknowledges the United States sanctions. He acknowledges that this is about oil. Yet when he talks elsewhere about Trump and what he's doing, he signals that the Trump administration is being peaceful and trying to provide an idea of peace. So I find that very interesting. I don't know if he's playing both sides. I don't know if he's, trying to appeal to Trump's ego, because that's what some people have said, that he's trying to appeal to Trump's ego. But this guy, like I said, we've talked about his connections to a lot of corporate, multinational conglomerates. So I found that odd. And then you have Vasily Nebenzia, who's a member of the UN. He's a representative of Russia for the UN. And he has constantly been going after Israel for their attacks on Gaza. He has constantly flat out called Washington for doing what they're doing. I mean, he's been pretty vocal about it. And he's one of the voices that I tend to highlight when it comes to Russian affairs, because he's pretty much on the money when it comes to calling them out. And I show this to say that there's not a monolithic stance coming from Russia. It really depends on which sectors you're talking about. It depends on who you're talking about. It's not a monolith. There are differences of opinion as to how to deal with the United States. There are differences of opinion as to how to view Putin's role, like how Putin is doing. It's not all just what you get. That's like, oh, NATO bad. Like NATO is calling Russia, and Putin Hitler, or Putin is going to save the world. It's like there are nuances between the two points of view that I think people need to start seeing, instead of like this very simplistic, like heroes versus villain mentality. And I keep talking about that because online, that's all you get. You get this very, cheerleader or accuser type of dialogue that has zero nuance, no discussion, nothing whatsoever.
This is what you were talking about when you said it ain't all roses.
Right. And it's not even just that. It's just that there are differences of opinion. There are differences in how
it's not
people
black
are,
or white.
And how it depends on who you're talking about, right? Nebenzia called for the release of Maduro and his spouse. We haven't heard that from, say, other members of the Kremlin. We just haven't. They haven't said that. They haven't even talked about it. So again, I just want to point out that there's differences into how this is approached, because what I think some people in the comments have said, hey, I heard some person on Twitter say that Tulsi betrayed Maduro. Like, please show me your evidence that you have. Please show me resources from the ground, resources from Venezuela. A lot of these people have never been to Venezuela, don't live in Venezuela, have nothing to do with Venezuela, and people are just using their tweets as fact. So I really feel like there was a need to discuss that, because there's a lot online that hasn't really been verified, I would say.
Stephen, you there? You want to try one more time? Let's see if we can get Stephen in. He looks like he's moving around. Hey, Stephen, maybe things have cleared up with the internet. How you doing over there?
Yeah, the connection's definitely better
There you go.
For the last 10 minutes. I couldn't hear anything that you said coherently. So where do you want to pick up?
Well, Fiorella was asking the question about the election, right? My part of the question is like, what was the excuse given by the government and why they changed the Constitution and kicked back the election? And Fam, what part of the election did you want to ask question about again?
No, just that, because that's going to be used against Nicaragua. So
exactly, they're going to use that in saying that Daniel Ortega wants to consolidate and hold on to power. Therefore, he extended his term. And what Donald Trump, what a lot of Trump people want, where they want him to be the last president over here. You know what I'm saying? They want him to be able to run again. That's what they're going to claim that Daniel Ortega wants. What are your thoughts on that altogether?
Well, it's the usual hypocrisy. And governments have changed their constitutions to for different reasons in order to extend their power. I'm sure that you and Fiorella remember JOH Hernandez, the president in Honduras, who changed the constitution to be able to get a second term. The same thing happened under Alvaro Uribe back in, I think it was 2010, 2011. And we all know the situation in El Salvador, where Bukele just does what he wants. So, of course, it's just the U.S. government and their apologists and propagandists and psychological warfare outlets applying a double standard and being extremely hypocritical as usual. So what's happened here in Nicaragua is that they've gone back to, because previously under the first constitution in 1984, when Daniel Ortega won back in 1984, the term was for 6 years, and so the next elections were in 1990, and those elections the United Opposition won, which the Frente Sandinista and Daniel Ortega respected, and so they gave up the government and handed it over to the right wing.
Was that the Somozas?
No. And that was Violetta Chamorro when she
Chamorro. I get the Chamorros and the samosas mixed up. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. Why wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Why should you remember all the details of Nicaragua? So, so that's what happened, and then the constitution was changed, and the next election was, I think it was in 1995. So then it was 5-year terms, and then after that, the next election was, and I think it was 2000. Was it 2000 or 2001? But anyway, and the terms have changed in the past, and all that's happened is that the new constitution has reverted back to a 6-year term, like it used to be. So I don't see any reason.
Did they give a reason? Did the government give a reason why they want to do that? I mean,
when they did the constitution, the idea was that they were going to modernize the constitution and adapt it so that more to the needs of the Nicaraguan people and the economic program that they're trying to implement, and presumably, and changing that to a 6-year term was part of that. That was part of the reason for it, because you know yourselves.
Yeah.
I mean, a 4-year government isn't going to change anything.
No.
What can you change in 4 years? And I think that was the logic.
I would argue too, because people have this American mindset that, oh my God, look at the Congress. They have all these dinosaurs sitting in there, just making a ton of money. This is in the United States. We need term limits because of that. They think that's the ultimate solution. But what I've learned over the past 7 years and going back and forth to Latin America, different countries, is that if the people like a strong leader and they want that leader to stay in power, they have every right to do. That has changed my mind on term limits. It really has. So I can understand why the people want the Sandinistas to stay in power. Do you think that Daniel Ortega is going to run next year, or is he going to have a successor? I know there's a lot of people who kind of look and say, I believe his son's name is Lario, or how do you pronounce it?
Laureano.
Laureano. And I've met him before. We had a quick talk briefly about Bitcoin and whatnot. It was a short conversation, but he seems very intelligent. He seems like he's on the ball. He seems well educated. He seems to have his pulse on the feel of the people of Nicaragua. Is he going to run, or are we going to expect another term maybe out of Daniel Ortega?
Well, I've no idea. I've absolutely no idea. Daniel Ortega's not been in great health for many years now. So it's an open question whether he'll feel in good enough health to be able to take on another presidential term. But you have to remember that now we have a co-presidency. We're probably the only country in the world that has a co-presidency, and by law, one of the co-presidents has to be a woman. So that's the institutional setup now. So it doesn't all depend. I think one of the reasons that they made that change was so that if anything did happen to Danielle, that there'd still be continuity with the other co-president. But can I go back to what you were saying earlier about the whole idea of term limits?
Yes,
and
please.
When back in 2010, 2011, there was a bitter conflict here with what was then the legitimate right-wing political opposition in Nicaragua, and they because the Supreme Court, the Supreme Electoral Council, and the Supreme Court declared a provision imposing term limits in the constitutional reforms of 1994. They declared that inapplicable because it was anti-democratic. That was their fundamental argument. Their argument was that if people want to vote for a candidate, they should be allowed to vote for that candidate, which is pretty much what you were saying yourself, Craig, as I understood as I interpreted what you said. Yeah. So that whole issue about democracy is absolutely fundamental. And is it democratic to deny people the right to vote for somebody they want to vote for?
Yeah.
And that just seems fundamentally, a fundamental
It seems
principle.
like it really hurt a lot of the freedom, the people in the national sovereignty movement in Bolivia. The fact that Evo couldn't get back on that ballot, and I know there was conflicts within the party, whatnot. But I think if Evo Morales was on that ballot, the majority of people would have voted for him again. And the fact that they kept him out really is, I think, a big loss when it comes to national sovereignty throughout that region.
Yeah, and that was such a can of worms, wasn't it? And the whole position of Luis Arce acting in a very anti-democratic way. But anyway, and that's water under the bridge now. What are we going to do about that? And here in Nicaragua, and the whole issue of will Daniel be able to be in good enough health to stand again for president, even if he wants to? And maybe he won't want to. Who knows? I don't know. But the fundamental thing is we go back to the fundamental principle of people should be allowed to vote for who they want if that person is a valid candidate. And so here, the people talk constantly about Daniel did this or Daniel did that, in the same way that they used to talk about Gaddafi did this or Gaddafi did that or Assad did this. Here in Nicaragua, there's a party structure. It's a very democratic party structure, and one of the FSLN is the party that, right from the year 2000, has been insisting that there has to be 50-50 representation for men and women. And that's been a fundamental principle of the Sandinista Party since, and I think it was 2001. They started that. They instituted that principle in their own internal elections, and once they took office as government, they promoted it as an institutional policy for all the country's institutions. And so the FSLN as a party is going to vote for their candidate. I don't know who they're going to vote for. They've got a Congress coming up in February, a party Congress coming up in February. And it's perfectly possible that at that Congress, they will nominate the candidate for the elections, their presidential candidate and vice presidential candidate for the elections that are scheduled for November 2027 now. So let's see what happens. But it's the idea that it's all imposed by Danielle is just ridiculous. There's a party structure, they have their procedures, and the candidate will develop and emerge from that process.
Fam?
Stephen, Nicaragua, I think a lot of people are speculating about what's going to happen because they're seeing the dominoes fall in Latin America towards the far right. And when we talk about the far right in Latin America, we talk about a US-controlled, Zionist-leaning type of government that is very much rooted in fascistic principles, that is rooted in putting multinational corporations in charge and pretty much robbing all of Latin America and the Latin American people off its resources and imposing, obviously, the will of the United States. Much has been talked about the Don Roe Doctrine, which is basically a take on Donald Trump's massive attacks. And before Donald Trump was president, Pasta and I and a few others talked about this pivot towards Latin America, which is what we're witnessing now. It's a pivot towards Latin America, towards focusing, and as our comrade and friend Terry Matson said, building a bloc in the Americas to basically compete against China and to basically amass all of the resources. So given that, how do you see the state of Latin America? I mean, you've been in Nicaragua, but you've seen what's happened in Venezuela, you've seen what's happened in Bolivia, you've seen what just happened in Chile, you've seen the attacks on Gustavo Petro in Colombia, and you've seen what's happened in Honduras recently as well. And Honduras, of course, with Xiomara Castro in power, there was kind of an open relationship with Nicaragua, more than there had been before. How do you see everything that's happened since, not just affecting Nicaragua, but affecting Latin America as a whole?
Well, Nicaragua maintains its position. It's a very prosperous economy, a successful economy, and it's very strongly integrated with its Central American neighbors. It maintains a policy of non-intervention, and it tends not to comment on the internal affairs of other countries. You know, they just 2 or 3 weeks ago, I've forgotten exactly when, they recognized the decision of the Honduran Electoral Council, which you can agree with or not agree with, but it is the decision of the Electoral Council in Honduras. And the government here has recognized Nasras Furi as the president-elect in Honduras. And so that gives you an idea of, and they're very strong on they're sticklers for following international law, respecting the internal affairs of other countries. So they tend not to comment at all on events that a lot of us are very concerned and anxious and worried about. So I'm looking at the rest of the region. I think I think one has to understand that even the right-wing governments and I think Donald Trump is an idiot. He's a demented idiot, a demented, murderous, genocidal idiot. And I think that I had this discussion with our friend Gloria the other day, and Gloria thinks that, or tends to think that everything is very carefully planned, that it's all worked out in a very realistic way, down to the very last detail. And I tend to disagree with that. I think that Marco Rubio is a victim of his own delusions. I bet any money you like that he told Donald Trump, we just need to get rid of Maduro and the Venezuelans will rise up and there'll be a government that we can work with. I'm sure that must have been the story. You know, the same way that they thought they could overthrow the government of Iran back in June. And I think that the nature of the dramatic theater of the kidnapping of Nicolas Maduro and Celia's wife, and that was very much in tune with the kind of blitzkrieg, the quick in, quick out approach of the United States, because they thought they'd be able to get away with that in Iran, and they were hopelessly wrong. They thought that getting rid of Maduro, they'd have a walkover in Venezuela. Well, that remains to be seen, and it's still not clear by any means what the government under Delcy Rodriguez and with Diosdado Cabello in running the Interior Ministry, and Delcy's brother Jorge, the president of the National Assembly, and General Padrino still the head of the defense forces. It remains to be seen how they're going to adapt to this new situation. But that's a whole other discussion. The thing that I want to try and stress is that people generally don't have a good idea of the nuances of China's influence in the region. And just look at Javier Milei. Javier Milei was, when he came into office, was saying that practically that he was going to cut off relations with China because it's a communist country, and he ended up acknowledging the importance of Argentina's commercial relations with China, and they ended up accepting and renewing the currency swap arrangement that was what kept Argentina above water prior to this recent, 20 billion bailout that the Trump government made available to Argentina, something like that. So and that's the story in Argentina. In Chile's had I've always regarded the governments of Michelle Bachelet and Gabriel Boric, who succeeded Sebastián Piñera, and essentially they're centre-right. Chile has been centre-right or right-wing for God knows how long, decades. And they maintain very strong commercial relationships with China. Ditto Peru. What's the United States going to do? Are they going to send naval ships to blockade the port of Chancay, this huge megaport in Peru that has completely transformed that part of South America's commercial prospects, shipping stuff from South America to China. And I don't know if you had a chance to look at them, but before, I think the other day, I can't remember exactly when, I lose track of everything. I think I sent you some maps of the interoceanic routes that are currently crossing. Some of them are complete, some still have to be completed. So you have the southern interoceanic connection between Argentina and Chile going across to the Pacific. You've got an interoceanic connection crossing from another part of Chile across Paraguay and into northern Argentina. You've got the interoceanic corridor stretching from southern Brazil to Peru. You've got the Mexican interoceanic route now, their rail route, where recently you may have seen in the news there was a terrible rail accident on that interoceanic rail route. But so what you have is these interoceanic connections that are very much designed to direct commerce towards the Asian market. Now, and so the United States is not going to change that. What they've done is, and you may remember this, Fiorella, perhaps Craig doesn't, but I think it was under the government of Mauricio Macri, there was an agreement whereby the United States Army would take over supervision and engineering maintenance work on the the Rio Paraná. It's a crucial waterway, facilitating commerce between Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay, and Argentina. And so Macri invited the army in to supervise that. So, and also you may remember that General Richardson, Laura Richardson, before she finished her term in the as the head of Southcom, made a visit down to the southern port of Ushuaia. And I think I also sent you a map of Argentina and its relationship to Antarctica, which is very important, especially with I don't know how far the climate change has affected I don't think it's affected the Antarctic as much as it has affected the Arctic, but obviously the United States has its eyes on the mineral resources there in the Antarctic, which is so they're able to do a certain amount of kind of policing to impose their will in the region, but the overall logic, the historic logic, is against them. They are unless they're going to militarize the whole region and physically prevent trade from South America heading towards China and the other Asian markets. India is becoming much more important as time goes by in terms of South America's commercial activity. So, I think there's a strong contradiction between all the hyperbole and the verbiage coming out of the Trump administration and facts on the ground. And people, I should imagine that right-wing governments like the right-wing government in Ecuador, the right-wing government in Peru, right-wing government in Chile, right-wing government in Argentina and Paraguay, they're going to string along to a certain extent with what the United States wants, and they'll do their best to make Trump to play up to Trump's vanity. But the nitty-gritty, the economic nitty-gritty, is against United States influence in the region. And what are the right-wing elites in these countries can see perfectly well that their economic interests are going to be more favorably advanced by developing their relations with China and the rest of Asia.
He was on a roll.
Pam, just to finish up in response to that, I do want to say that doesn't necessarily mean that that's going to favor the people of South America, because again, like I said earlier, it's a competition of resources.
States.
Stephen, you cut
and
out for a
it's just
second.
a fact of life.
You cut out there for a second. And you're cutting out again. Okay, but I did hear what you were saying, and I was just saying in response that this is, it doesn't necessarily mean that things will be more or less favorable to people in South America, because again, it's two major powers competing for resources. Obviously, one has been not bombing and not going through this, through their interactions, by the same way the United States has. But at the same time, it is still two competing world powers in the region that may not necessarily be any sort of salvation. That's left to be seen. I think also.
I agree with you very much that it's completely wrong to think about China and Russia as saviors in any sense. And Latin America and the peoples of Latin America have got to work out their relationships between themselves and their relationships with the United States. But I just think that it's absolutely clear to me, I may be wrong, but it seems absolutely clear to me that even the US right-wing allies in the region are going to want to develop their relations with China. And the United States can kind of stamp their feet and do what they like, unless they're going to militarize the whole region, unless they're going to kind of put naval resources to blockade. They may well do this. We don't know. They may seek to blockade China. And isn't that Brian Berletic's argument? Brian Berletic has been writing for a long time about his conviction that the United States is determined to blockade China. Well, if they're going to blockade China, they're going to have to blockade Shanghai port or persuade multiple South American businesses to stop trading with China. Are they capable of that? Well, we'll see. Who knows? But
I think the Trump administration has been tapped to start in to make sure that there's a disconnect between Latin America and China. And fam, I know what you're saying too, as well, as far as like it is another superpower. That doesn't mean things are essentially better. But if you look at these two superpowers in black and white on paper, here you got China coming in with their ingenuity, their checkbook, their willingness to do business based upon infrastructure and engineering, is where the United States comes in with a missile and a gun and says, "Hey, you do business with us or else."
Can I chip in there?
Please.
And Nicaragua, Fiorella, I'm not going to disagree with you one way or another about, is China a superpower and is it just going to behave as a superpower? I have no idea about all that. All I know is that from our experience here in Nicaragua, China is helping us build thousands of houses for low-income families. They're helping us build solar energy infrastructure and wind energy infrastructure that's going to help make us less dependent on hydrocarbons to generate electricity. We're already up around 70%. 70% of our energy supply now is from renewables, and China's helping us improve that still more. So, and they're helping us build an airport, an international airport. They're helping us build a logistics center, that's a state-of-the-art logistics center that is going to be of great benefit, not just to Nicaragua, but to the whole region. And, and so that's China. And so that our experience of China is that they are helping develop the potential of the country to meet the needs and aspirations of its people. Now, earlier on, before I was able to take part in the program, I heard you discussing socialism and, is China socialist? And I think something along those lines. And from our point of view here in Nicaragua, we've had that argument. People have been saying, well, the Frente Sandinista isn't really a socialist party, and Daniel Ortega is not really a socialist. Well, who knows about that? And people can have that ideological argument. What we know here in Nicaragua is that this government responds to the needs of the human person. It responds to the needs of the families of Nicaragua. We have free universal health care. We have free education from preschool up to university, and people going to university are eligible for scholarships from the government, and on a large scale. And we have subsidized electricity for families on low incomes. The bus fares in Managua are subsidized so that people pay. I've forgotten how much it is now. I think it's around 5 cents US for a bus fare. And gasoline prices, the prices of liquid gas that most people use here for cooking, and they've been frozen, and the government subsidizes those prices. There's a whole series of measures that are in place in Nicaragua, and that people would die for in the United States, And so, is that socialism? I don't care. And the people in Nicaragua have a government that works for them, that listens to them, and implements measures that meet the needs and aspirations of ordinary people here in Nicaragua. How many countries around the world can say that?
Stephen, when I made the comment that their infrastructure project, and I tell this to people all the time because they hear the socialist word and they get oh my God. And I always say we're one species on one planet. We can play nicely in the sandbox and build things together that help humanity. And that's why I guess I consider myself, I call myself a leftist libertarian at times, because I do believe that, my freedom of speech, my privacy, freedom of a press, I believe those things, and a free speech absolutist. You should be able to say whatever you want as long as you're not inciting violence. But when I do talk about Nicaragua, and we talk about the road to Bilwi, right, and how that was built and constructed, and you've seen that before your very own eyes, that opens up markets, right? Does it not open up markets? I mean, because, I know people don't like, the capitalist word. Capitalism, to them in the United States, they look at that as freedom and more choices. They're not, in other words, they're blindsided, and they got this comical vision of what socialism really is. But they believe is markets opening up. That's a form of capitalism. Have not markets opened up since the infrastructure projects in Nicaragua have been booming?
Yeah, I don't know. Even look, the fundamental thing about Nicaragua since 2007, when Daniel Ortega took over, the really fundamental thing has been its economic democratization. And they brought hundreds of thousands of people that were previously excluded from economic activity, especially women, especially rural families. They brought them all into highly productive activity, strengthening Nicaragua's economy, making it food self-sufficient. And I think we produce something like 90% of the food that we consume here in Nicaragua.
Yeah.
And
great food, by the way. Restaurants are so under. I really wish tourism would open up. I had me and Wyatt and Gloria went to an Italian restaurant in Nicaragua. It was one of the best Italian restaurants I went to in my whole life. It was amazing. Sorry, continue. No.
That's a great advert for tourism to Nicaragua. Thank you. So that fundamental change in Nicaraguan society, and people talk about democracy and socialism and all, and to us here, what's important is, are we able to make it possible for people to emerge from poverty? And poverty reduction has been absolutely fundamental. And that poverty reduction is economic democratization, because people who are previously unable to take part in the economy, thanks to all the measures that the government has implemented, are now able to take part in the economy and live a decent life. They can send their kids to school. They don't have to worry about the cost of education. They don't have to worry about the cost of healthcare. They don't have to worry about, well, will I be able to afford the bus fare to, to start a new job on the other side of town, for example, just an example. And the it's not, and there are things that are difficult for people who do come from a socialist background to accept, like, for example, the free trade zones, where you have tens of thousands of people employed on not great wages, but at least they have a job, and that's from the point of view of people in Nicaragua, having employment and being able to cover your basic needs and have a bit left over, and that is something that they wouldn't have been able to enjoy. They'd have had to emigrate in years past, go to Costa Rica, try and go wet back to the United States or something like that. So what the economic democratization has achieved here in Nicaragua is great social and economic stability. And I don't know if I should have sent you the last opinion polls about how people think of their lives here in Nicaragua. And it's something like 80% approval for Daniel Ortega and Rosario Murillo, and there's something like I think it's over 65% approval for the Sandinista Party as a political party, and to questions like, and do you think that the government is taking the country in the right direction? And it's overwhelming. 85 or 90%, and the support for the government and for the social and economic system that the government is developing here, as a result of what we regard as a revolution. It's our Sandinista revolution, and that is what we're going to defend. And going back to the question before we had all the technical problems about, how does Nicaragua view the current situation as a result of the events in Venezuela, and we are very well aware that we may well be next in some sense. We don't know what the US government is going to do, and Donald Trump is kind of a totally unpredictable megalomaniac, and so we just don't know what they're going to do. We know that they've announced that they're going to implement staged economic coercive measures, but so far they haven't said that they're going to try and expel Nicaragua from the Central America Free Trade Agreement, which and let's just see what happens. But whatever they do, people in Nicaragua, and in particular the Frente Sandinista, which, and I think the last figure I saw was that something like 55% of people support the Frente strongly, and rather than being independent. If you've got that level of support in the country for the party, for everything that it stands for its historic program that they're implementing systematically, and as part of their 5-year plans. They do 5-year plans here. If you have that level of support, then the government is very likely going to be able to legitimately say, well, we're going to resist whatever the United States tries to do. We're not going to accept that they're going to destroy our sovereignty, destroy our self-determination. We will resist. And you've got, I know in Venezuela, and maybe Fiorella, you have a better feel for this, but my understanding is that around 40 to 45% of Venezuelans consistently vote for the PSUV or the PSUV coalition. And here in Nicaragua, and the figure has been around 45 to 50% solidly Sandinista, and then another 10 to 15% of independents that support the government's policies. And that's why they always win elections with around 65 to 70% voter support. So, And if that's the case, it's very difficult to see how the United States is going to force those people, over half the population, to do something, to act against their own interests and to start dismantling.
You're talking about in Venezuela.
Either Venezuela or Nicaragua. I think it's
both. Okay.
In both countries. I think it's very similar. Maybe not the same, but very similar. You have a over half the population probably that are not going to willingly dismantle a system that has brought them a decent life. You know, if in the United States, if people had universal free healthcare and free education from preschool up to university level, do you think they'd give that up? Of course, they're not going to give it up.
Fam, you want to jump on in? I mean, I'm writing down question after question over here. So, you know, I have so many questions. So, but go ahead.
No, you go ahead if you have a lot of questions.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's so many things I want to talk about. Some of the information you sent me, I was able to read too as well. And I don't know if you remember, I talked to you about meeting this guy, Freeway Rick Ross. He was a convicted drug dealer here in the United States that eventually was let go because he had confessed and blew the whistle on the CIA, handing him drugs that were used to sell in the streets of Compton. And that money was used to buy guns and then, fund the Contras in, the Sandinistas, against the Sandinistas. You had written about some stuff, what's going on. This whole shebang started when Donald Trump started blowing up ships in the Caribbean, saying that they were bringing fentanyl to the United States. Now, according to his own numbers, 0% of the fentanyl, I mean, a lot of his State Department numbers and whatnot, 0% of the fentanyl was coming from Venezuela, right? This is all about, smuggling drugs. And I have said for so long, we learned from Iran-Contra, that scandal, that the CIA works closely with the cartels. Now we see a big push from people like Dan Crenshaw and a lot of his cronies in the in the Congress of the United States wanting to get policies into play that will allow them to go into Mexico without the permission of the Mexican government. What do you see going on as far as criminal activity and as far as drug smuggling in the region? Do a lot of those same old norms that a lot of us who know that the CIA and the DEA was involved with smuggling? I mean, if you look at a lot of the trails, you'll see that the banking industry is involved with the cartels. How is it like in Latin America right nowadays when it comes to the smuggling of drugs? Because they're going to use that as an excuse. I wouldn't be surprised if in a month or two they start calling Daniel Ortega a narco-terrorist the same way they called Nicolas Maduro a narco-terrorist. Your thoughts, Stephen?
Well, they have in the past. They've accused Daniel Ortega and the Sandinistas of being involved in drugs trafficking in the past, and that's been shown to be ridiculously false. But I'm the United. What is the United States government? The United States government is the most sophisticated organized crime operation in the history of humanity. That's what the United States government is and has been for a very long time. So, I'm back in, 2009, 2010, the UN Office on Drugs and Organized Crime, I've forgotten, like the UNODC or something, I think is their acronym. And they stated publicly, and it was widely reported. Even The Guardian reported it. He said that the United States banking system was only able to survive the financial crisis of 2008, 2009 because they had sufficient liquidity from the drugs trade. That was a statement by a very, very prominent UN official. And you're quite right, Craig, to point back to Iran-Contra and the whole issue of how banks like, the International Bank for Credit and Commerce, was it BICC? And you probably remember all this stuff better than I do. And it's absolutely clear. And then subsequently through the 90s and the 2000s, there were just repeated instances of banks being fined $10 billion or $20 million or maybe even hundreds of millions of dollars, which for them is just a slap on the wrist, given the money that they're processing because they were laundering money from organized crime and drugs trafficking. You know, the Wachovia Bank, the HSBC Bank, and the bank, many very well-known banks, including banks that are part of the primary dealer network of the Federal Reserve, but nothing ever happens to them. They just have to pay in business, and so that's absolutely clear. The United States financial system depends for a large.
Did we lose him again? Ah! Every time he gets on a roll, the CIA zaps him.
Let's see if he can get back in, because I want him to finish off. If he can get back on. There he is.
Hi, Craig. Can you hear me?
We can hear you, buddy. I'm literally texting you as you're coming back on.
I'm sorry about these connection problems. And where did we get to?
We were talking about the banks and Iran-Contra and a lot of the... Can you hear me? I don't know if you can hear me.
I'm sorry, Craig. The signal's dreadful.
Okay.
Can't hear you.
Okay. We'll get him out. We'll get him out for now, and maybe he can say a few things because we are in a time crunch. We haven't. Sam, should we just start on the next document? Maybe tell him.
Yeah, let's do that. I mean, man,
we're already an hour and 25 minutes in.
Here he comes again.
Yeah, sorry. Have we got a good connection now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so yeah, and I think we got to where I was talking about the involvement of the U.S. financial system as an integral part of the international drugs trade, and not just the international drugs trade, but illicit funds of all kinds. But even the CIA, I think, came out with a figure of a little while ago, saying that they calculate that around $300 billion a year going through the U.S. financial system comes from illicit sources. I mean, that's the CIA, you know. So God knows what the truth is. But then going back to what you were saying about the regional aspect of the drugs trade here, it's absolutely clear, as people like Max Blumenthal and the team at the Grey Zone and others have pointed out, that the main channel for cocaine to the United States now is Ecuador, with Daniel Noboa, the president of Ecuador, being among the key figures, and his family business being one of the key transport facilitators for the sending drugs, not just to the United States, but to Europe as well. And that, what does that do? That just reproduces the persistent history of the way that, for example, General Noriega in Panama was used by the CIA and was involved in the drugs trade. The way that JOH, the Juan Orlando Hernandez in Honduras, was involved in the drugs trade. And it's just so ridiculous, isn't it, that Trump has pardoned somebody convicted in the US courts of channeling, who knows,
400 tons. 400 tons of cocaine, which is, I think each ton is like 2,000 pounds. So you can figure out how many pounds of cocaine this guy's done. So please.
Right. And yet they've mounted this huge, dramatic, extremely damaging operation, extremely disruptive operation to kidnap Nicolas Maduro and Celia Flores, who have nothing to do with the drugs trade, despite all the phony propaganda that's been put out against them over so many years. And here in Nicaragua is an absolute bulwark against organized crime, against drugs trafficking. They regularly confiscate tons and tons of cocaine and other drugs every year, and they're recognized by their neighboring countries as a country that's free of drugs organizations and organized crime in general, and they're certainly free of the kinds of gangs that have destroyed the lives of ordinary people in Guatemala and Honduras, and until recently in El Salvador, and which has been the main driver of migration to the United States over the last 10, 15, 20 years. So I think they'll have a very hard time trying to convince anybody that Nicaragua is in any way involved in the drugs trade in Latin America.
You'll see. They're going to try to make a connection. Remember, wasn't it a Nicaraguan diplomat? Jeffrey Epstein was tied into the whole Iran-Contra affair too, as well. A lot of people don't know that. But wasn't a citizen of Nicaragua was one of the persons who did business with Bolivia, I believe, during Iran-Contra, to get a lot of the cocaine into the United States, which was turned into crack? I do believe
there was a guy called Meneses who was very prominent in the Iran-Contra, among others. That's what's that? 40 years ago now.
Yeah. Well, I'm just saying, be prepared. They're going to try to make. I don't know if they'll use drugs. What about the canal? Is the canal a reason why the United States? There was supposedly a proposed canal that would shoot through Nicaragua from the Caribbean side to the Pacific side, and that would be north of the Panama Canal. In other words, the United States wants to control maritime trade and exports. Is the canal being built? Is it being built by the Chinese? Do you know anything of it? Is that a reason why the United States too would want to stop Nicaragua from doing something like that and put in a friendly puppet that won't allow that project to be built?
Well, I think one of the reasons that canal has not been built is precisely for that reason. If the Chinese aren't prepared to militarily protect what would be a massive investment, God knows how many tens or hundreds of billions of dollars to build that canal, there's no point in them building it, because the United States will just take it over one way or another, or blockade it or sabotage it one way or another.
Yeah.
So until the issue of U.S. imperialism in the region can be negotiated away from the Chinese point of view, because for the foreseeable future, the United States is going to be able to impose its will militarily. Unless China can come up with a negotiated settlement allowing them to build the canal, I don't see how they can build it. But when people talk about the canal, and I was very fortunate to be able to do some interviews back in 2011 and 2012, 2013, when the canal was originally being broached and designed, with Dr. Paul O'Keefe, who unfortunately passed away some years ago now. But he was the presidential secretary for public policy, and he was responsible for sorting out how the canal would actually be designed and what would be associated with it. And the canal was a whole series of projects, not just the canal itself. The canal involved the international airport that is now being built. It involved the expansion of the port of Corinto on the Pacific coast. It involved the building of a deep water port on the Atlantic coast at or near the Caribbean coast town of Bluefields on the southern Caribbean coast of Nicaragua. It involved the building of a logistics center. It involved the building of more free trade in industrial areas. It involved the construction of an interoceanic railway that would accompany the canal, and that. So various elements of that canal project, not the canal itself, are being implemented and built. You've got the airport, you've got the expansion of the port of Corinto, you've got the construction of the port on the Atlantic, the Caribbean coast at Bluefields, you've got the development of a possible railway, an interoceanic railway connection between Corinto and Bluefields. And you've also got the development of free trade areas with Chinese money.
Yeah.
So, and that when the United States says that it's going to squeeze China out and box China out of the region, and Nicaragua is a perfect example of how, if they're going to do that, they're going to have to occupy the country militarily. And if they have any sense, they won't even think about doing that, because it'll just be Sandino all over again.
Yeah, I think so. That's interesting. Fam, do you want to jump back in and get a question for Steve? I don't know if say is Fam there. Fam? I don't know if Fam's there. What happened in Honduras, in your opinion? I was there for the last election, not this last election, but the election before the last. The Libre Party seemed to be the party of choice of the people there. There was a lot of supporters of Manuel Zelaya and a lot of supporters of Xiomara Castro. Why did they fall short this time? I mean, I know you're not in Honduras, but you pay close attention to the region. Do you have any thoughts on that?
And I've spoken to several people from Honduras, and the general feeling there is that it was indeed a U.S. intervention, one way or another, as well as some malfeasance by the Electoral Council that led to the electoral outcome that we've seen with the Electoral Tribunal in Honduras naming Nasra I've forgotten Asfura, thanks.
Yes, Asfura.
As the president-elect, and so there is a general opinion that Rixi Moncada made some serious mistakes in her campaign that were exaggerated by the role of U.S. intervention, the threat that people feared that if they voted for the Libre candidate, they might lose their family remittances from family members living in the States. That was the threat that was circulated in social media. I think they reached something like 3 million Hondurans who had relatives in the United States. So that whole psychological warfare had a serious impact. Trump's announcement that he expected the Honduran people to vote for Asfura, and that had its impact. So there's a whole series of factors involved leading to the current outcome, and I don't see any way that the Libre Party are going to be able to turn that around. I had a very dear friend, Margarita Murillo, who was a campesina leader in Honduras, who was murdered in 2014. And she always criticized Mel Zelaya for not breaking free from the political culture of the traditional Liberal Party from which Mel Zelaya himself emerged. She was strongly critical of the way he did politics as the leader of Libre. So, and there's a whole series of factors, and I don't see the current outcome being reversed. And I think Libre have got their work cut out to regain their predominance as the leading political party in Honduras now.
Steve, thank you. I'm sorry.
I just want to say last couple of things, to respond to everything you said. I admire Nicaragua for being self-sufficient, for really making it work. And I agree that, regardless of the socialism aspect or the ideological aspect that people really care about defining, I think it's important that nations provide for themselves and their people. So those were some great points. What I do fear, though, is that we are getting into a world where we have global powers that are extremely powerful competing for resources, and ultimately nations that are deemed less powerful will not get a seat at the table and will not really be able to be sovereign anymore. And that is where I see the world going, unfortunately. And that's why I'm constantly fearful of what may happen to Nicaragua. So because
Yeah,
it is one of the only places that exists that I see as sovereign and as dignified and as understanding its history and its people.
yeah, no, and I share your concern, and who knows what's going to happen at a global level. But one
Yeah,
thing that I am absolutely certain of is that people here in Nicaragua will defend their sovereignty and their right to self
good.
determination, and if it's necessary, they'll resist to the bitter end.
Stephen, thank you so much for joining us today, brother. Hopefully next time we get a better internet connection, we can be as mellifluous as we can. You had a lot of great things to say. Where can people go find your work and follow you?
Yeah, and I've got a small website, tortillaconsal.com. I don't do much work by way of videos. I'm nowhere near as prolific as Fiorella and yourself and other friends, Gloria and others. And so, yeah, and if people want, we try to put up information in English and Spanish about Nicaragua and the region on that website. So I do check it out, tortillaconsal.com.
Yeah.
Thank you, Stephen.
Thank you,
We love it.
Stephen. See
You're
you
very
soon,
welcome,
buddy.
and thank you for all that you do. You're wonderful reporters, and you do great analysis. Thank you.
Thank you for educating us and opening up the doors to Nicaragua every time we come there, brother. That's why we call you Stephen Sweetheart, because you're amazing.
See you soon, God willing.
Later, Steve.
Yes. Bye.
Love him. Stephen Sefton. Fam, why don't we go blitzkrieg through your stuff? There are like a bunch of comments right now in the chat. Like there's this one guy in there who's kind of arguing from this false premise. I know, there are a lot of interesting questions out there, but maybe you can address some of them as you go through your the doc separating fact from fiction, because no matter how many times we tell people that there wasn't a cartel issue in Venezuela, there wasn't serious drug running and exportation from Venezuela, they still argue from that point that, oh, well, why didn't Maduro ask for help getting rid of the cartels and stuff? Like, what help did he need? Like, the Trump administration used this, like, the whole from the souls, from the sons thing, and then they removed it and said it was fake.
Yeah.
So it's all propaganda. So when you're arguing from this false point of view, the dude in the chat, we can't have a discussion from how the tooth fairy came in and left me $5, because there's no such thing as a tooth fucking fairy.
Yeah, I just don't feel there's a need to address like things that are just invalid at this point. Like there's no such thing as Maduro being the leader of a
drug
cartel. Like it's just absolute lunacy. Like we were saying, the drugs don't even transport that way. They transport, through the Pacific, America, Mexico, and then towards Ecuador. That is the biggest, pathway that happens. And again, the United States, the DEA has been involved largely with drug trafficking. Everybody knows that. People in Latin America know that. This is not a new thing. And clearly that was the excuse. What I really want to hone in on is a lot of the theories that are coming from the right wing, from Trump supporters, from American analysts, from a lot of people that a lot of Venezuelans on the ground and a lot of people have been really angry that a lot of this has been taking place, because it's honestly, I can see how it's really annoying, because you have, people on the ground there, you have people with facts, and then you have American and Western commentators just saying things without any sort of evidence or anything. They just think they know, but they've never even stepped foot in Venezuela. They have no idea about the government, the structure, any of the stuff. And it's really not helping the situation at all. So I just want to point out some things coming from some people that are actually in Venezuela right now. And Diego, who I interviewed with Vanessa, he's the one of the people that has Misión Verdad, and he's actually in Caracas. And he gave a brief analysis from Franco Vilma, who is also Venezuelan. And they pointed out something that's interesting, because this whole thing about Delcy Rodriguez being chosen by Trump because she betrayed Maduro, really, a lot of it is not backed by fact. What we do know now, what has been confirmed by Mexican or Venezuelan officials right now, is that there was some mid-level sabotage, meaning that there were elements that did infiltrate and then betray the Venezuelan government. Mid-level, we're not talking about Diosdado, we're not talking about Delcy Rodriguez. They haven't said that. Now, I know from Syria and what happened in Syria, where there was tons of information that was false, tons of information that was true, and everything in between, that everything is possible. And I understand why people have questions. I understand that a lot of this doesn't make sense, especially if you don't have all the facts. So for me, yeah, I agree, that there was, and I guess that's been confirmed now. But here is this brief analysis from Franco Vilma. And he stated that the biggest intrigue surrounding Delcy Rodriguez's betrayal of Maduro was actually put forth by Donald Trump. Donald Trump's the one that's been pushing this, and I've been seeing it on Russian channels. I've been seeing it on a lot of independent, whatever, libertarian, that has nothing to do with Venezuela. And he stated, for some, Trump suddenly became a credible, honest, truth-telling individual who doesn't lie or manipulate facts to achieve his goals. The objective truth is that Trump is a convicted felon prosecuted for crimes such as Gaza, or for crimes and accused of pedophilia who lied about foreign policy issues such as Gaza, Ukraine, Venezuela, fentanyl, cocaine, prisoners released from jails and mental hospitals, etc., tariffs, and many other topics. Trump, the credible one. But then why does Trump insist that Delcy should collaborate and is collaborating? Number one,
Jayme,
Trump says that...
Do you have a tweet, or do we have something to look?
Well, it's okay. If he doesn't have it, it's on Telegram. But Trump says that not to convince Venezuelans. And I agree. Trump is not trying to convince Venezuelans. He's trying to convince Americans and trying to convince Westerners to project the image that he controls the situation, that there will be no day after chaos after kidnapping the Venezuelan head of state. Trump wants to break down Chavismo leadership in Caracas, even if he has to create intrigue for that purpose. He exerts pressure and intimidation, asserting that he will protect his country. His strength is his weapon, and he's using it. The very moment that he indicated that Delcy was collaborating, he also threatened her with a fate worse than Maduro's if she didn't submit to his tutelage. The threat is unnecessary if Delcy was actually co-opted. Right. So that's another valid point. Trump can't maintain internal order in Venezuela unless he sends troops in the style of Iraq. He doesn't want to do that. And this is another thing. One of the things I said was, I don't think we're going to see G.I. Joe, boots on the ground. And we didn't see that in the sense of having, hand-to-hand combat, because the United States would lose in that. And they already know that they would lose. So they didn't want to do it that way. So they weren't going to do it that way. I think he understood that only through Chavismo, and this has been echoed by many people in Venezuela and high-level people, that only through Chavismo will there be any sort of possibility. Because even with ousting Nicolas Maduro, we're seeing this loyalty to the Venezuelan government, right? We're not seeing this chaos that a lot of these people are saying, there's going to be civil war, there's going to be civil war. We're not really seeing that. Is it possible? I guess, but it's highly unlikely, because there is this backlash that's happened towards Trump for what he did, coming from the Venezuelan opposition. And we're talking outside of Maria Corina Machado, who doesn't have large support. The Venezuelan opposition is not okay with what went down. So this is something that you have to really account for. Now, Trump says that this transition has to be done by Chavismo, but this is the most ambiguous part of his proposal. He dismissed Maria Corina Machado, but he doesn't set deadlines. He talks about oil infrastructure, but then, if anything, elections. For that, he has to say that he controls Delcy, even if it's not true, saying "I control" is the best way to cover up the real issue. In other words, Trump basically needs Chavismo in charge. But the reality is that if Chavismo's in charge, he's going to have a very hard time, as Stephen was saying, taking over. And I agree that this is not just as easy, because I think they thought eliminating Maduro would mean like everything would fall apart, the same way that they thought about this in Iran. Eliminating the president, everything's going to fall apart. But what they don't understand is how things are structured, right? In these places that have structures and contingency plans and ABCD plans based on what may happen. And so it's really interesting that, many people just jumped onto this without actually paying attention. And I recommend all of you go read the Telegram channel Misión Verdad, because they're from Venezuela, and they've been putting out a lot of information on Venezuela. And one of the things that has been thrown out, which we sort of discussed yesterday, was Delcy Rodriguez insisting on peace, right? And we said, is that the right thing to say at this moment when you're negotiating with somebody that literally just kidnapped your president? Maybe not necessarily PR-wise, but Maduro himself has largely been saying the same thing. Maduro himself was largely advocating for peace with Trump, has always been diplomatic in terms of advocating for working with the United States. Some people may not like that, may not agree with that, but that's something that, that happened. And one of the first things that Delcy Rodriguez did after Maduro was kidnapped was basically create this commission advocating for his release. Why would she do that if she's not serious about doing so, right? And so I think that a lot of that is some good starting points to counteract, like, I think a lot of what we've been hearing in those terms regarding a lot of what we've seen, especially on X and on Twitter, right? And again, we've already seen this is Maduro's son, who basically gave his full support to Delcy, said, my unconditional support for the difficult task ahead, count on me, count on my family. This is the tweet. You can count on our resolve to take the right steps in facing the responsibility that now falls to you, and we stand firm in absolute unity to achieve the objective of peace in Venezuela, to move the country forward, and for the return of Nicholas and Celia. Now, high-level people in Venezuela have said that things are peaceful, that things are okay right now, that there's no, like mention of civil war that a lot of these people have been saying, and that they actually are passionately pursuing the return of Maduro. Now, I don't know how realistic that is about returning Maduro, but that's something I want to point out. Fam, anything to say on that before I go on?
Well, I'm a little confused. There are two different parts, right? So we're talking about Nicolas Maduro's son. By the way, the United States has a history of lying and throwing out so much propaganda out there. It's hard to grasp what they are actually saying they're not. And, that doesn't mean that other governments don't lie. Nobody's saying that, but there's a lot more reasons to believe a lot of these smaller governments in Latin America from what they're saying, because they're operating from a point where they're going to stand behind international law, right? Like, Stephen even said, they're very keen on supporting international law, being honest with it and stuff like that. Then you can state your case. That doesn't mean the United States is going to follow it, but at least you have the truth to stand on against their propaganda. With that being said, we talk about Nicolas Maduro's son talking about, we will find out someone who betrayed. What avenue have you seen did somebody stand down, right? Because I did share with you yesterday, and I'm so sorry. If you want to concentrate on what's going to happen on moving forward in Venezuela, we can sidebar this and bring this back another time, because I have to look into this. Margaret Kimberly reposted something saying, why are these idiots out there repeating this stupid stuff about not a shot was fired? There were 32 Cubans that were killed on that raid from the Delta Force.
Yeah, like 80 people total.
Yeah, there was a lot of people killed and stuff like that. And what area do you think there was betrayal, standing down, allowing these Blackhawks to get in? There was also drones and bombing from a lot of bombing of Caracas itself. What area do you think there was betrayal and stuff? We said mid-level. What did they exactly do? Do we have any information on how there was
No,
a betrayal and not yet.
I think this information will come. I just think like a lot of either what we're getting are half leaks and half truths, or we're just getting people making shit up, because like none of these people know. I don't see Venezuela, very much like the resistance access in West Asia, doesn't leak what they're going to do. They don't put out their plans. They're not going to live tweet all this stuff. Like, this is what people need to understand. Like, and Russia doesn't do it either unless they want you to see it. These countries don't operate like we do. They don't like go and put out like everything, like in that if they're trying to protect themselves, they're not going to put it out there. And so I don't know what exactly happened. And I don't think anybody that's not the people that were there know, or that hasn't gotten a direct confirmation from a high level source in Venezuela know. And that's the thing. None of these people are even in Venezuela, and nor do they have this information. They're just taking it from some Telegram channel. What we do know was that there was mid-level sabotage. And what that means is specifically remains to be seen, because I understand, I said it from the beginning, there had to be some sort of sabotage in order.
You said there was an inside, there's possibility of an inside job. And I said, for them to even know he was there at that time, somebody had to fucking betray him. So yeah. And so that's, I mean, that's common sense, but the specifics of it, you know, saying it was Delcy Rodriguez, or saying this, and there's the fight between her and Diosdado and all this stuff. Like there's like, where are people getting that? I don't know what, you know, but like I said, like I'm open to hearing people say that. But what I don't like is that a lot of these people have zero ties to Venezuela, and they have no, like, where are they getting this information from? Suddenly I'm seeing all these accounts on X being promoted by the algorithm, posting this information that contradicts what's being on the ground. And I know that's possible due to Syria, but at the same time, I'm suspect because it's a lot of what Trump's been saying, right? And it's a lot of what serves the United States, this idea that Venezuela is on the brink of collapse, this idea that Venezuela is divided, that they're going to engage in a civil war. All of that serves the United States, and it serves Zionist Israeli interests. I mean, because that's also what we're looking at here. It doesn't really serve Venezuela. So even, let's say, if somebody was right about something, putting it out there as conjecture doesn't help. And I said this when all this stuff with Syria was happening, like, it just doesn't help, because it makes it worse, and it like diffuses the information. So I think what we're facing here with Venezuela is una guerra mediática, right? Like a propaganda war, an online propaganda war. And that's something that they've been facing for a long time, since Iran's faced it. You know, this is a thing that's been happening, and nobody really knows exactly what went down, but they have admitted that there was some sort of sabotage. What people have stated, that it had to be Delcy Rodriguez, that it had to be the military, you know, that's up for discussion. I mean, we really don't know, and anybody telling you that they know is lying, you know, at this point. Because one of the things that I do want to say, there's some people that have been talking about this stuff online, but one of the things I do want to point out on that's been put out was actually the New York Times put out an article, right, that I think was based on what I've been checking from people on the ground in Venezuela, is largely accurate, because Trump, and this is the next tweet, Trump was persuaded by arguments from senior officials, including Marco Rubio, who said that if the US tried to back the opposition, it could further destabilize the country and require a more robust military presence inside the country. This was said by a CIA intelligence analysis, or it was said by senior officials, but it was backed by a CIA intelligence analysis. And that why Trump didn't back Maria Corina Machado was because they grew skeptical of her ability to seize power. So they didn't think that she could hold it down. And so this is one of the reasons why Trump's own BS about Delcy Rodriguez doesn't make sense, because one of the reasons why they decided to go upon this strategy was because Maria Corina Machado isn't somebody that could hold power. But Donald Trump seems to think that with the capture of Maduro, and I think this is largely coming from Marco Rubio, that everything is going to fall apart.
And so this is how they're acting. Now, in the New York Times article, they talk about Trump's envoy, Richard Grenell, meeting with Machado's representatives and her not following through these meetings, not really actually offering much of anything. And this relationship then deteriorated essentially. And the lack of popularity that Machado has basically destroyed her relations with the Venezuelan business elite. It's not just me. Other people that have studied Venezuela or have been in Venezuela have been talking about the Venezuelan opposition and the business elite getting pissed off because they have been recently able to work with Maduro and actually continue making money. I know Venezuelans who even went back to Venezuela saying that it was better and that things have better there. And these are anti-Maduro Venezuelans. And I'm telling you, this happened. The business elite getting pissed off at Maria Corina Machado is a real thing because she kind of interrupted a good thing that they had going, a negotiation. Maduro started opening up with trying to work. I don't know if you remember, fam, but a couple years ago, there was a conversation about the PSUV opening up conversations with the opposition in an effort to make some sort of outreach and unite the public further. And then the result of that was that the business elite, even in Venezuela, started working with Maduro. So when Maria Corina Machado went out there, because she represents, as Terry said, the extreme far right that wants to basically, and flat out says they want to sell all Venezuela out to other national, multinational elites, they don't like that because they're the ones that are benefiting right now. So she basically created a situation where she shot herself in the foot and became so unpopular that even the United States couldn't really stand by her, because then they would have had to physically force people to accept her, which would have created a worse situation, not just for Venezuela, but for the United States to take control. Because I think they realized that there would be backlash, but I still don't think they even realized that even this and what they did has caused backlash, not just in Venezuela, but even in the United States, from people who are being arrested by Donald Trump and put in these ICE detention centers and are realizing, wait a minute, Donald Trump's arresting us. He's putting us here. We thought Maduro was the dictator and the bad guy. Now we don't understand what's going on. And I think that's a weakness that the United States did not account for.
So then why make this move now? And who's going to control the oil? You know what I'm saying? I mean, they're saying, all right, I'm going to play this here. I'm sorry.
Nosotros solo estábamos festejando por la captura de Nicolás Maduro y nos pusieron aquí. Es injusto. Ahora que estoy en estas condiciones, ya no sé quién es el malo. Yo pensé que el dictador era Maduro, pero es Donald Trump quien nos tiene en estas jaulas.
He said, now that we were just celebrating, the capture of Nicolas Maduro. And then I guess these people were celebrating in the United States, and then they were put in an ICE detention center. He's like, now that we're sitting in these cages, we don't know who the bad guys are. We thought it was Nicolas Maduro, but Donald Trump put us here. And a lot of people were like mocking them, saying, too little too late, you realize it. But that's not the point. Like, you're right. You're right, but that's not the point. The point is that Trump's actions against all of these people that he's putting in these detention centers are turning these people who are anti, Maduro, anti whatever, against Donald Trump. They're turning them against the United States. They're making them realize what Maduro was talking about. They're making them realize what people were talking about when they said what they said. They're making them understand through their experience the reality of what the United States is and what they do and how they treat people. They're thinking, they're going to go to the United States. Donald Trump is going to welcome them with open arms. I've had, Venezuelans say, Donald Trump isn't going to go after us because, we have businesses in Venezuela and we're fine. And what did Donald Trump do? He literally threatened everybody. It didn't matter. Even if you had a green card, they're going back and checking all of this stuff. People with green cards are getting put in ICE detention centers. American citizens are getting put in ICE detention centers. So what all of this has done, including Trump's gigantic attack on Venezuela, is literally turned people who were on his side, on the side of the United States, and calling Maduro a dictator and all this stuff, has made them question their entire existence, because now they can't, they have reality, and then they have like the picture that they were painted of what the United States is. And so I think this is a very important point that a lot of people are not really talking about, right?
Yeah. Well, what about that question I had about the oil? Are they going to be able to control the oil? I mean, we have Delcy Rodriguez and the Chavistas are still in power. You know what I'm saying? A lot of the QAnon right-wing idiots who were saying that Maduro gave himself up working for the CIA, handed over the oil to Donald Trump, don't realize the fact that the Chavistas are still in power. Donald Trump has been making all these claims, the fact that they're going to run the oil, control the oil. Stephen Miller's been going on there saying that stuff. Marco Rubio's kind of christened himself as the governor of Caracas. Are they going to be able to control the oil infrastructure right now? And is Delcy Rodriguez and the Chavistas are they going to let them do that? I mean, have you heard anything about that? Because that's what I'm curious about right now. I know this is a plan to start destabilization by removing the head of state and then hoping that the dominoes would fall in place. I don't see the dominoes falling in place. And in fact, I see a lot more, and obviously, you have idiots out there. Alex Jones had to apologize for all the videos he was showing, right? He was showing like a World Cup celebration. He was showing, I mean, literally he had to apologize for the 3 videos because, the people were out there sharing an AI video, fam, of a Venezuelan woman crying of happiness now that Maduro is gone. But when you saw the real videos in the streets and the people we know, you see the videos where a lot of Venezuelans who are part of the opposition are now marching in the streets with the Chavistas saying, hey, I didn't like Maduro at all, but you have no business taking our president. That was our president. He might have been an asshole, but he was our asshole. Who are you to tell us what to do? That's the majority of the sentiment that I see in the streets right now. So my question to you is, all these threats about controlling the oil with Maduro gone, does that mean the U.S. is going to lock in the rights to the oil, or is it going to be a struggle moving forward?
Well, I think it is going to be a struggle, but I think Venezuela is in a vulnerable position. I think you would be like ridiculous to not say that. I mean, they took out Nicolas Maduro, they took out the president, they went in there, and I think a lot of the reason why that happened was because I don't think Venezuela had even if they had help, even if they would have acted without sabotage, I think they were aware of their limits. I think it's just Occam's razor at that end. Like I think they knew their limited capabilities. This is why Maduro had tried to talk about diplomacy and peace and all of that. But I don't think that means that Maduro betrayed his country. We really, again, everything is possible. We've seen what happened with Assad. We've seen the realities that have come out since then. But Maduro seems to me somebody that was, not a military guy, but definitely also somebody that believed in what he stood for, and his wife who went with him, right? Who decided to go with him, and who is now also facing these charges. I have a hard time thinking that he would just give up his people. But I understand why people think that. It does seem very theatrical the way they paraded him. But I think that was done by the United States on purpose, because this is Donald Trump. He loves theater. He loves attention. He loves all this stuff, the spectacle of it all. And Maduro himself has become an enigma. People sold out. They sold out of the Nike suit he was wearing. I tend not to trust any politician at this point based on everything that's happened, but I have a hard time thinking that Maduro would just sit back and give up his people. And Delcy Rodriguez, based on her background, who her parents are, they were revolutionaries, how pro-Palestinian she has been, I have a hard time thinking that the Trump administration would put their weight behind somebody like that unless they had a reason that we don't know about to do so, or unless they had another play in their sleeve, which I think is what they do, Pasta. I mean, I think that they aren't just going to give up when this is the closest they've had to controlling Venezuela. I think that it's going to be a fight. But what I've been hearing from people in Venezuela is that things the people of Venezuela are actually going to put up a fight. I mean, they're not just going to allow themselves to be dominated by the United States. And I don't know what that's going to look like, because Donald Trump did issue this warning, right, to Tulsi, say you need to kick out China, Russia, and Iran, and they want to control basically the oil, as you said. But is she going to do that, right? Is she actually going to do what Donald Trump wants? How would they have a mechanism of enforcing that? Is he threatening for another invasion unless she does this? These are things that I think are open to happening. And was the operation very much similar to a CIA type of operation? Yeah. I mean, they went in, they got him, and they got out. I mean, the other thing that's been revealed to me is that there were some American troops that were injured in the fight in their attempt to capture Maduro, but the United States isn't talking about that because it would put them in a weak position. And so I think that there is a lot more coming from Venezuela. I think they're more united than people think, but I still think they're in a vulnerable position. I think that the United States can and isn't going to stop until they have Venezuela. And Venezuela is going to have to pretty much fight, right? Because Donald Trump has said they're going to take the oil, that they want the oil. And so far, Donald Trump has been like, whatever he has said in terms of taking something, they've done. They took Syria's oil. They you know what I mean? It's kind of like, I would be naive to think that it's not a strong possibility for this to happen, right?
Yeah. Fam, we can continue this conversation on Friday with Danny Shaw, who will be on the show with us to talk about Venezuela this Friday. You're also going to be on Uncontrolled Opposition tomorrow, which will be shown on the TruthWire channel.
Yeah.
With Vanessa Beeley, Gloria Guillo, Professor Jeremy Kuzmarov. That's tomorrow. That's what Fam's got going on. And Friday, like I said, we'll be back 12:15, 12:30 ish to have Danny Shaw on to talk about that.
Two things before we finish. Just if you can go to the section Is Venezuela Finished and show the second tweet. This is a video from Orlenis, who is in Venezuela also. And
Orlenis is awesome.
She's long been obviously covering Venezuela. She said, as of January 5th, the situation is Venezuela in Caracas. Total calm. It is false that there's chaos in Caracas. I just recorded this video from east to west, passing through the historic center of Caracas and the surrounding of the Miraflores Palace minutes after a flyover of 12 enemy drones was reported in said area, which was repelled by the Venezuelan state security forces. So she did a whole drive through. And again, so this is somebody in Venezuela. So somehow,
somebody we've known for a while.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know, like, anything is possible. But what I am saying is that what a lot of these people who we've known for a while, who are in Venezuela, who have, who are there right now, are saying completely different things than what a lot of these randomly out of nowhere coming accounts have been saying. So I wanted to put that out there. And the other thing I'm going to mention quickly before we go is the U.S.-Russia situation, right? Because I will talk about that Friday, but the American forces did seize a Russian flagship in the Atlantic Ocean.
Yeah.
And a lot of people are going on and on and on about this, but I think ultimately the United States and Russia are in conversation. And I think ultimately there's not going to be some gigantic war that Russia is going to join Venezuela to fight the United States. I mean, that would be cool. I honestly would prefer that, because that would mean that there is some sort of alliance, like on that level. But it's just not reality. That's just not going to happen. And a lot of people are just like jumping the wagon on this. Of course, Russia is going to call for the return of their people, the nationals that are on the vessel. Of course, Russia is going to have some words of saying this is illegal. You need to back off. Duh, of course. Why wouldn't they do that? Does that mean that all bets are off, that the deal is done? I just don't think so. And all you have to do is go look at Kirill Dmitriev and what he's been saying. And that's it, And
Look at this comment. Chaos in Caracas is as fake as chaos in Tehran. Harder to pull these lies off with social media. That's so true. Guys, we'll be back Friday with Danny Shaw. We'll have more conversations. That will be the Truth Wire tomorrow. Please tune in to Fiorella going on Uncontrolled Opposition with Vanessa Beeley, Gloria Guillo, and Jeremy Kuzmarov. And I have 3 interviews tomorrow. Do you have my thing, Jayme? Is it ready?
We're busy this week. I haven't stopped every day.
That's the wrong one because it's a green background, not a yellow background, but that's okay. This is the one I'm going to do tomorrow. Ryan Christian at 11 a.m., Kyle Anzalone at 12:15, and Wyatt Reed at 1:15. That's tomorrow on the Pasta to Go channel. So we got a lot of stuff going on. We do work. We are busy. We do work. That's all we do. We want to thank you all for joining in today. All the links are down below. You can take that on off. All the links are down below on the Help Independent Media. So please go over there and give us a buck or two if you're in the position to. And until then, we'll see you next week. For Craig Pasta Jardula, Fiorella Isabel, see you tomorrow, not next week. And Jayme CheeseSlice and Stephen Sefton on the 1s and 2s. We love you guys. Truth out.
Bye.